If you've ever taken, a lump of physical clay and tried to actually sculpt a character, the rules of reality are pretty straightforward.
Right. You push the clay and it moves. It's just physics.
Exactly. And if you make a mistake, you just squish it back together, match it into a ball, and start over. It's wonderfully tactile, but it is deeply unforgiving.
Oh, yeah. There is definitely no undo button in real life. You drop that clay, it smashes on the floor, and you're back to square one.
Yeah, you're just done. But then you step into the world of digital 3D modeling, and suddenly you are dealing with this digital clay. And people on the outside tend to think this makes it easy.
Because of the magic keyboard shortcut.
Right, you have that magic Ctrl Z undo button, so it must be a breeze, right?
Hmm.
But what you quickly realize is that digital clay comes with a staggering amount of mathematics, geometry, and honestly, some incredibly clever illusions just to even function.
It's all smoke and mirrors under the hood.
It really is. So we are diving straight into a fascinating source document today for our deep dive. It's a highly detailed technical workflow created by an artist named Jeremy Moss, and it's titled Ogre V1.3.3.
Which is, it's essentially a masterclass recipe. It's this step-by-step breakdown of how a professional builds a massive, imposing 3D monster from absolute scratch.
Right, taking it all the way to a fully textured, game-ready asset that you could just drop right into high-end software like the Unreal Engine.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see the whole process laid out.
And for you listening, especially if you love understanding how things work behind the scenes, but you don't really want to slog through a dense, like 500-page software manual, this is going to completely change how you look at video games and animated movies.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to unpack the anatomy, the intense math, and those artistic shortcuts that digital artists rely on to trick our eyes every single day. And what's wild to me is that this document doesn't start with an incredibly detailed eyeball or, a beautifully sculpted bicep.
No, not at all.
The very first step, which they call the preparation and blockout stage, just uses, well, it just uses cubes.
Yeah, just floating low-resolution cubes. It is the absolute unglamorous foundation of 3D modeling.
It's so fun to look at.
Right. If you look at the early images provided in this workflow, the ogre does not look like a terrifying monster at all.
Mm.
It looks like a collection of overlapping, blocky cardboard boxes.
It really does. It's like building a skeleton out of chunky Lego bricks. You have a rectangular block for the chest, a slightly longer block that's just shoved into it for the upper arm.
Another block for the forearm.
Exactly. But reading through this, I realized the artist doesn't even build the whole ogre. They only build exactly half of it, which made me wonder, why not just build the whole body?
Well, because humans and, humanoid monsters are perfectly symmetrical. So building both sides manually is just a massive invitation for error.
Oh, I guess you'd never get the proportions exactly right on both sides.
Never. It's a crucial efficiency in digital art. So the document details the use of an empty object and a mirror modifier.
Okay, let's break that down. What actually is an empty object?
An empty is basically just an invisible coordinate point in 3D space. It holds no physical geometry whatsoever.
So you can't even see it in the final game.
Right. It's just a mathematical anchor placed dead center in the workspace. And by applying a mirror modifier to the character, the artist is telling the software, hey, look at that invisible center point. Every single cube I place on the right side of that point.
Instantly calculate and reflect it on the left side.
Exactly. You shape the right shoulder, and the left shoulder simultaneously morphs to match it in real time.
That is brilliant. It cuts the work entirely in half, but I did notice they arrange these mirrored blocks into a very specific stance. They call it an A pose or a T pose, where the arms and legs are spread really wide apart, away from the body.
Yeah, the classic T pose.
It looks incredibly stiff, like an action figure fresh out of the plastic packaging. Why not just model the ogre in a cool, menacing crouch right from the start?
Well, it does look unnatural, but that wide pose is mechanically essential. Think about a character standing with their arms resting naturally against their sides.
Okay.
Maybe their hands are touching their thighs. In a 3D space, the geometry of the wrist would literally intersect with the geometry of the leg.
Oh, the digital blocks would be clipping through each other.
Right. So later on, when you ask the computer to calculate how the skin stretches, or, when animator tries to lift that arm, the computer might actually confuse the vertices of the wrist with the vertices of the hip.
Wait, so lifting the arm would accidentally pull a chunk of the thigh up with it?
Exactly. It would look like a horror movie. You need that negative physical space between the limbs to isolate the geometry for all the steps that come later.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But looking further into this blockout workflow, I kind of have to challenge this whole digital clay has an undo button idea.
Oh, here we go.
Because the document makes a massive, like, flashing red light deal out of backing up work at this specific stage.
Yes, it really does.
They take these chunky Lego blocks, they apply a subdivision modifier, which essentially tells the computer to round off all the sharp corners so the cubes look like organic pill-shaped muscles.
Right.
And then they do something called applying the modifiers, meaning they lock the math in permanently. So if digital art is so flexible, why is the artist so terrified of losing their work right here?
Well, that right there is the great miss of the digital undo button. Yes, you have a safety net, but it's only for your recent clicks during a single working session.
So once you close the program, it's gone.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But worse, when you apply a modifier like subdivision, you aren't just changing how the object looks on your screen. You are fundamentally rewriting the core mathematical geometry of the object in the software's memory.
You're permanently changing the blueprint.
Exactly. You're telling the software, hey, forget that this ever was a simple cube with 8 corners.
Yeah.
This is now a complex, rounded sphere made of hundreds of interconnected points. It is a point of no return.
Wow. So if you realize, say, 3 days later that the shoulder is an inch too low, you can't just unsubdivide it to fix the base block.
You can't. The simple block just doesn't exist anymore in the computer's memory, which is why the author emphasizes the philosophy of non-destructive editing.
Right, having a backup plan.
Always. Before hitting that point of no return, the artist completely duplicates the entire collection of 3D objects and drops them into a hidden folder. It's a structural safety net.
So if the complex sculpting goes terribly wrong down the line, you don't start from scratch.
You just pull up your hidden folder of chunky blocks, make your slight adjustment, and start the process over.
Okay, so we've got our rounded blocks, we've safely hidden our backups, and now the ogre is roughly shaped. But it's not actually a solid object yet, is it? It's like a bicep floating slightly inside a forearm, floating slightly inside a torso.
Right, there's still entirely separate overlapping meshes at this point.
And the workflow tells the artist to select all these floating body parts and hit a command to combine them. But, just grouping them into one folder doesn't fix the physical reality that there's still internal geometry hiding inside the body, right?
Oh, no, it doesn't fix that at all.
Like the top of the arm block is still fully modeled, it's just buried deep inside the chest cavity.
And leaving internal geometry like that is a computational disaster. I mean, if you leave a full arm block jammed inside a chest block, the game engine will still try to calculate light bouncing around inside that dark, hollow cavity.
Even though the player can never see it.
Exactly. It wastes processing power, it causes rendering glitches, and honestly, you just can't smoothly sculpt across the seam where the two shapes meet.
So how do they fix it?
This is where the document introduces a vital, heavy-duty mathematical process called a voxel remesh.
I really need you to explain this, because voxel remesh sounds like some kind of sci-fi weapon. What is actually happening to the digital clay here?
Okay, so the best way to visualize a voxel is to imagine filling your entire 3D digital workspace with microscopic sugar cubes,
Okay, sugar cubes. Got it.
like a giant 3D grid. When the artist triggers a voxel remesh, the computer looks at all those overlapping messy body parts and it fills the entire volume with those tiny sugar cubes.
Right.
Then, it ruthlessly deletes every single sugar cube that is trapped inside the body.
Wait, really? So it hollows it out entirely?
Completely hollows it out. It only keeps the sugar cubes that are actively touching the outside air. Then, it instantly melts those outer cubes together to weave a brand new, perfectly continuous candy shell over the whole shape.
That is insane. So it literally stitches Frankenstein's monster together into one seamless skin.
Yep, the seam where the shoulder was jammed into the torso just completely vanishes.
It's replaced by a smooth, mathematically continuous surface that the artist can now push and pull exactly like real physical clay.
Exactly. Now they can finally do the fun part.
But as they start sculpting this unified body, adding muscle tone, shaping the jawline, defining the calves, I noticed a really strange quirk in the notes.
Oh, about the feet.
Yes. The artist spends all this time carefully defining the anatomy, but they specifically leave the feet and the groin area completely unshaped.
Yeah.
Just totally blocky and devoid of detail. Like, is the artist just being lazy? Why skip sculpting parts of the model?
It's definitely not laziness.
Yeah.
It's actually a masterclass in resource management.
Yeah.
The golden rule of 3D modeling for games or animation is ruthless. If the camera can't see it, do not waste your artistic time or the computer's memory building it.
Right, because the ogre is eventually going to be wearing armor. The document mentions boots and a thick loincloth.
Precisely. I
Yeah.
mean, why spend 4 hours sculpting anatomically perfect, terrifying ogre toes, complete with cracked toenails, if they are going to be permanently encased inside thick leather boots?
Because it's just wasted data.
It is. The computer still has to process the geometry of those hidden toes every single frame, which bogs down the entire game engine for literally zero visual payoff.
That is so practical. But then I saw another note about the ogre's hands that really confused me. The author mentions that they sculpted the hands tightly clasped together into fists.
Right.
But then they immediately add a massive caveat. They explicitly say they only did that for static sculpting practice. If this ogre were going to be fully animated in a video game, they noted that the fingers must be separated and splayed out.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge deal.
Why is a fist such a bad thing for animation?
Well, it goes right back to that voxel ramesh, the sugar cube process we just talked about. Imagine sculpting fingers tightly pressed together into a fist.
Okay.
When you run that remesh algorithm, the computer doesn't understand human anatomy. It doesn't know there are 5 separate digits pressed against a palm.
Oh, it just sees one big solid lump of volume.
Exactly. So it weaves that continuous skin right over the entire fist, completely fusing the fingers together into a solid mitten of flesh.
Ooh, so if the animator later takes that model and tries to make the ogre open its hand, or point a finger, the digital skin between the fingers would stretch and tear like hot melted cheese on a pizza.
Yeah, the physics would completely break. It'd look absolutely horrifying. So for any character that will eventually move, you have to sculpt the hands completely open, fingers splayed wide, just like the A pose for the body.
You have to maintain that empty space so the computer knows where one finger ends and the next begins.
Exactly. You have to tell the computer what's what.
Okay, so now we have a fully unified, anatomically sound, mostly, minus the toes ogre body. But right now, looking at the workflow images, it looks entirely too clean.
Oh yeah, it looks like it's made of perfectly smooth gray plastic.
Right. So how do we get from a smooth plastic toy to a leathery, scarred, terrifying monster?
To do this, the artist drops that voxel resolution down to an incredibly tiny number. The document specifies changing the voxel size to 0.0015 meters.
That sounds absurdly small.
It is microscopic. And by making the 3D pixels that tiny, the surface mesh becomes incredibly dense. We're no longer talking about thousands of points. We are talking about millions of vertices.
Millions.
Millions. And the computer needs it to be that dense to hold extreme, minute detail. This is where the workflow introduces alpha brushes.
I was hoping we'd get to this, because the idea of an artist manually carving every single microscopic pore, scale, and wrinkle by hand just didn't seem possible. How does an alpha brush actually work?
So the best way to think of an alpha brush is like a highly detailed physical stamp being pressed into very soft clay. An alpha is essentially just a flat black and white image.
Okay, like a photo.
Yeah, let's say it's a picture of cracked leather. The software interprets the white parts of the image as high points and the black parts as deep crevices.
So when the artist drags this brush across the ogre's shoulder, what is the math actually doing?
The software looks at that black and white stamp, and it instantly pushes and pulls those millions of tiny vertices up and down to match the pattern. It physically displaces the geometry.
Wow. So instead of spending hours carving lines, they just select the rocks brush for the shoulders, the scales brush for the forehead, and the wrinkles brush for the neck.
And they literally just stamp the illusion of tough, gritty skin onto the model in seconds.
It's algorithmic texturing, and it's incredibly powerful. But as they're adding all this intense detail to the skin, you'll notice the logic fundamentally changes when they get to the ogre's face.
Yes. The face logic was brilliant because it's entirely driven by how the character will eventually move, not just how it looks.
Let's talk about the eyes. They don't just sculpt bumps on the face for eyes, they insert perfect geometric spheres. And the document is very strict about this. These spheres must have a maximum of 16 sides.
Right.
Now, we just talked about the body having millions of vertices. Why purposely use such a low-resolution, blocky shape for an eyeball?
Because eyes need to be rigged for independent, rapid movement. A pupil darting around a room needs a clean, simple mathematical pivot point.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you use a highly complex sphere with 10,000 sides, calculating that fast, constant rotation becomes unnecessarily heavy for the game engine.
So it's about performance.
Exactly. A 16-sided sphere is just enough geometry to look perfectly round when the game's lighting engine smooths it out, but lightweight enough to animate effortlessly.
It's all about cheating the eye. But the real kicker for me was the mouth. They build these giant, terrifying underbite teeth and the massive horns on the head as completely separate objects from the main body.
Yep.
Even though the rest of the body was perfectly fused together with that voxel sugar cube method, the teeth are just floating, separate meshes jammed into the gum line. Why not fuse the teeth to the jaw so it's one solid head?
Think about the physics of a roar. When an ogre screams, the jaw drops open, the cheeks stretch incredibly wide, the lips pull back.
Right.
If the teeth were fused into the same continuous skin mesh as the lips, the computer wouldn't know the difference between soft tissue and hard enamel.
Oh, wow. So as the lips stretched backward, the computer would stretch the teeth right along with them.
Yeah. Exactly. The solid bone teeth would warp and bend like rubber. It would look like a surrealist nightmare.
That sounds hilarious, actually.
It really does. But by keeping the teeth and the horns as entirely separate objects that are merely linked to the underlying skull bone, the artist preserves the realistic physics of the character. The skin can stretch and deform as much as it wants, but the bone remains rigidly independent.
That is such a clever workaround. But here is where we run into a wall. All this incredible detail. The millions of tiny polygons pushed around by the alpha brushes, the separate teeth, the dense skin folds. It creates a massive existential problem for the artist.
The problem of success.
Exactly. The sculpting phase leaves the artist with a breathtaking cinematic quality model. The document notes it sits at around 2.5 million vertices.
Which is huge.
But if you try to drop a 2.5 million vertex character into a video game and then ask the engine to render 30 of them charging at the player at 60 frames per second, your computer's going to catch fire. It is literally impossible to process that much math in real time.
Right. The engine would grind to an absolute halt. So the artist has to use what is essentially a digital shrink ray. In the industry, this incredibly tedious process is known as retopology.
Retopology. The document mentions using a mathematical algorithm called a quadramesher to handle this. The stated goal is to take this 2.5 million vertex masterpiece and shrink it down to just 30,000 vertices.
Yeah.
That is throwing away, what, 98% of the geometric data? Doesn't that just turn it back into a blocky mess?
Well, it sounds incredibly destructive, but it's actually a highly controlled optimization. The algorithm mathematically drapes a brand new, low-resolution net made of larger, fewer polygons over the high-resolution sculpture, basically tracing its broad shape.
Okay.
But there's a huge catch. You cannot just let the computer blindly reduce the polygons evenly across the body.
Why not? If it's a net, shouldn't it be even?
Because of the joints.
Oh.
If the blind algorithm decides to leave only 2 large polygons around the elbow, that elbow can no longer bend smoothly.
Oh, it would fold flat like a cheap piece of cardboard.
Precisely. Joints need a higher density of geometry-specific circular loops of polygons to deform and hinge correctly during animation.
Wait, so if the blind algorithm doesn't know where an elbow is, how does the artist fix this?
The document says they paint the joints red. Do they literally have to manually paint the joints of a 2.5 million polygon model?
Yeah, they do.
Why can't the software just figure out human anatomy?
Because to a standard algorithm, an elbow isn't an elbow. It's just a slight protrusion in the math.
Yeah.
It has no idea that protrusion needs to hinge 130 degrees. So yes, the artist relies on vertex painting. They take a digital paintbrush and manually paint the hires model's joints, the shoulders, elbows, knees, the knuckles on the hands, bright red.
Like a literal heat map.
Exactly. And they paint the flat, unbending areas like the middle of the thigh, the shin, or the chest, white or blue.
Oh, I see. So when the algorithm runs, it reads those painted colors as strict instructions. Red means pack a dense cluster of polygons right here so this area can bend beautifully. And blue means this area is flat and rigid, save memory, and use as few polygons as possible.
It is an incredible balancing act between maintaining the illusion of detail and actually functioning in a game. But, okay, let's say the model is shrunk. We have this optimized 30,000 polygon shape.
Right.
But it's just a blank gray digital mesh at this point. How does the computer know how to paint the modeled green skin, the dirt, the shadows onto this complex, bumpy 3D monster? I've always wondered how a computer understands the surface area of a 3D shape well enough to wrap a flat 2D image around it.
You've hit on what is arguably the most conceptually frustrating part of 3D modeling for beginners, UV unwrapping.
UV unwrapping. Break this down for me because reading the document, it sounded like geometry torture.
It honestly can be. The best way to understand UV unwrapping is to think about peeling an orange.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you want to lay an orange peel completely flat on a table so you can paint a detailed picture on it, you can't just smash the orange. The peel will tear, warp, and distort.
Right, obviously.
You have to take a knife and make strategic cut seams so the 3D sphere unfolds neatly into a flat 2D shape.
And the 3D software needs the ogre's complex body completely flattened out so it can apply flat 2D texture files to it.
Exactly. A computer monitor is 2D, the image files are 2D, so the 3D model must be translated into a 2D map.
Makes sense.
The document details treating the ogre's complex limbs as simple cylinders. The artist goes in and manually selects specific digital edges to act as seams. They cut the arms from the armpit down to the wrist, they cut down the inner thighs, they essentially slice the character's skin open so it can be unrolled and laid perfectly flat on a digital canvas.
But wait, if you're literally cutting the digital skin, won't you see a visible seam when the computer wraps it back around the 3D model? Like if you've ever played a game and noticed a weird line down a character's neck where the skin texture suddenly doesn't match up like a bad wallpaper job, is that what that is?
That is exactly what that is. A poorly placed UV seam. That's why UV unwrapping is an absolute art form. You have to strategically hide your cuts where the player or the camera will never look.
Oh.
The workflow specifically notes placing seams down the inner arms facing the body, the inner legs, and hiding a vertical seam at the very back of the head, which will likely be covered by hair or armor.
Places that are naturally blocked from view.
Right. And to make sure the flat map actually works, the software displays a tension heat map. Once it's unwrapped and lying flat, the software highlights areas in light blue to warn the artist where the digital skin is stretching too much to lay flat.
So if it's blue, it's bad.
Yeah, if the top of the ogre's broad shoulder shows up light blue, it means any texture painted there will look pulled and blurry in the final game.
So the artist knows they have to go back in, cut another seam to relieve the tension, and unwrap it again. It is so meticulous. Every single step is about managing data and hiding the mechanics.
It's all an illusion.
And just to put a final bow on this construction process, the document briefly mentions adding final accessories, like the ogre's thick leather belt. And even this avoids manual sculpting. They use a shrink wrap modifier.
Right. Instead of trying to painstakingly mold a digital circle by hand to fit the exact uneven, bumpy contours of the ogre's waist, they just create a simple, flat digital plane.
Okay.
They apply the modifier, which tells the software, make this plane act like a powerful elastic plastic wrap and suck it directly onto the ogre.
Wow, so it acts like a virtual magnet. It literally snaps around the waist perfectly, hugging every weird curve of the stomach automatically. It's a testament to how many invisible, mathematically complex tools are working behind the scenes to save time.
It really is a symphony of shortcuts and illusions.
So let's look at the journey we've just been on. We started with literal floating cubes.
The chunky Legos.
Right. We used an invisible center point and mirroring math to block out a skeleton. We hollowed it out and fused it into a single skin with microscopic voxel sugar cubes.
Right.
We used flat images to stamp millions of tiny rocky details onto the skin, creating a 2.5 million polygon masterpiece. And finally, we painted heat maps on its joints and digitally peeled it like an orange to shrink it down to a clever, optimized 30,000 polygon illusion that's lightweight enough to actually swing a club in a video game.
And that's the grand takeaway here. The next time you sit down to play a video game or you're watching an animated movie, realize that you are looking at thousands of these meticulously crafted, optimized illusions interacting in real time.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Every single object on screen is hiding a secret UV seam. Every moving character is utilizing perfectly painted, low-density polygons just so they can bend their knees without folding like paper.
And every massive monster is absolutely hiding unsculpted, blocky geometric toes safely inside their boots.
Precisely.
It completely changes how you look at digital media. You're not just looking at a scary ogre, you're looking at highly optimized, incredibly fragile, interactive mathematics.
Which leads to a really provocative question about the future of this entire industry.
Oh, for sure. Because right now, as we speak, automated tools and AI generation are getting better and better at instantly spitting out 3D models.
Oh, yeah.
You can just type scary ogre with horns into a prompt, and the machine generates a shape. So it leaves you wondering, will this meticulous, highly mathematical workflow, the manual vertex painting, the tedious retopology, the strategic cutting of UV seams, will all of this eventually disappear entirely?
It's the ultimate question. Do these tools replace the artist or do they just elevate them? I mean, instead of a human spending 4 hours acting as a digital seamstress, manually hiding cuts on an inner thigh or painting knuckles red, perhaps they become purely digital architects.
That's a great point.
They focus entirely on the grand design, the emotional resonance of the character, the storytelling, while the computer finally, quietly, handles the messy mathematical business of the virtual clay in the background.
It's an incredible thought to end on. Maybe one day the digital clay really will be as forgiving and simple as physical clay, and that magic undo button will actually do all the heavy lifting. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.